The topic today is looking at how we develop from childhood on to adulthood and influences that create the society we live in, as well as the experience each of us has of ourselves and of other people. Erich Fromm, who wrote Escape from Freedom, was a lot of his writing and work was based on the interaction between psychology and society. Escape from Freedom was his first book, at least the first one that reached wide recognition. Written in 1941, he had escaped from Nazi Germany himself, came to the US in the early, I think, 1933, and he wrote quite a few books. The most famous is The Art of Loving, but Escape from Freedom is also quite well known. And you know, given today's activities in our country, it's important to understand what the heck is going on, because it can be pretty surprising, and it's easy to have reactions that are not fully aware of what causes this movement of our democracy towards authoritarianism. So maybe it'll be more clear at the end of our meeting. I have a slideshow, and we'll also have some discussion. So let me share that, and we'll get going. Okay. And by the way, you can expand or drag over the part that has your gallery of the people. If you want to see all the people, you can make that bigger on most interfaces. All right, so the topic is from childhood to adulthood and the health of society, which we just discussed that. I'm starting here with a quote from Erich Fromm. Basically, what he's saying is that we can look at other countries and see, oh, they have dictatorships. Hey, Russia, other countries have this for decades, or even centuries. But what about our country? No, we're a democracy. And yet, when people feel insignificant and powerless, they tend to look to ally themselves with something more powerful than them to ease the anxiety and the pain of feeling helpless. So it's a risk, as he says here, anywhere in the world, even in our country, when the individual starts to feel defeated or at risk, they look for an alliance, even if it's not based on certain kinds of logical thinking. It still makes sense when you understand the motivation. So I'm going to trace some of this from early on to, childhood to adulthood. One of the things I hear sometimes is this darn cliche, the terrible twos. If you have a 2-year-old, or you know a 2-year-old, or you have a grandchild, or whatever, they're, at 2 or so, 2.5, 3, they start to say no a lot, and they don't want to cooperate. And people see that as unpleasant behavior because the reason for the behavior is actually when the child is first beginning to understand that they have their own existence and their own rights and needs to be an individual. They start, not very effectively or skillfully, they'll just say, no, I don't want that. Even if you're giving them their favorite food, no, I'm not eating it. They don't say all those words, but it's no. And rather than seeing it as terrible, it could be seen as the birth of this free person who can express themselves and feel that they are important and valuable. So rather than assault the no with a counter argument, it's important to engage in conversation and encourage their individuality while also discussing why they should eat their breakfast. And our society tends to look at children as cute and kind of silly, give them lots of sugar, but actually children have serious questions about life, and those questions should be listened to and answered as best we can, including what is that noise that mommy and daddy are making in the bedroom at night? Or why are they arguing? What is that? Why were you yelling at each other? So these things can be answered even for a young age. There are ways. And it's actually early in the book, and I'm bringing this up. But as far as sexuality, you can say we love touching each other and we enjoy hugging, and we enjoy that. And that's why we make some sounds. The child would probably drop it and then and move on to other things. They don't really care that much. They're just curious, really. But they hear some energy, right? Um, dumping the ways that society dumps information and dulls the child's originality and spontaneity is forcing them to learn a lot of random information that doesn't connect to anything else. Also demanding that they sit still, don't move, don't talk, and teaching that truth is a relative thing, that there is no absolute or real truth, that everything is open to opinion. And these all weaken the sense of self. Like if a person knows this is a bad behavior that someone did, oh, well, they thought it was the right behavior. They stole some money, but they must have needed it, or some other kind of rationalization. I remember when I was married to a Catholic, and I went along with this thing. Santa Claus is giving you some gifts Christmas time, all right? Then they got to be like 8 or 9 years old, and my son says, "Dad, is Santa Claus real?" So I had to come up with a good answer. Anyone have a good answer for that question when a 8 or 9 year old asks you, and you've been telling them all along, Santa Claus is giving you some gifts? How do you answer that? I did come up with an answer, but it was under pressure, so I don't expect you all to have a good answer. But in case you're ever in that situation, here's my answer. Santa Claus is the spirit of generosity. He's not a real person like we are, like solid, but he represents being kind and generous. And he goes all over the world. And that was the end of the conversation. I think that was considered to be a satisfactory answer. But it's important to be honest with children. Any comments, thoughts? Anyone want to share a thought? Okay.
Could you
Yeah,
can you repeat what you said to him? I didn't get the first part.
sure. Santa Claus is not a solid person like us, but he represents generosity and kindness, and he's all over the world. Okay?
So basically, you're saying there is a spirit of generosity um, around the world, and in a way, if you want to seek it, it's out there for you.
If you want to seek it,
Anyone, for anyone.
say it again. If you want to seek it, what?
If you want to seek the spirit of generosity, kindness,
Yes,
giving, loving, you can choose to connect with it. I mean, so
yes.
far you've been on the receiving end, but hey, you can be on the giving end too.
That's a very good and spontaneous expansion of the idea. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's because it's important to realize that does exist around the world and to connect to that, right? Let me turn off. I have a heating unit here that's making noise. Hold on a second. Yeah, so it requires some looking inside yourself, like why do we talk about Santa Claus? What's a good reason this all started? There's always a good reason. So if you find that core reason and share that in a way a child could understand, you won't go wrong. So going ahead, so when infants start to realize they're separate, which is in the first 2 years of life, they, towards the end, towards around age 2, they realize also that they're vulnerable. They don't have much control or any control. So it's a threatening experience. A young infant, a few months old, doesn't have the brain power or understanding that they're separate from their parents and so on. So they don't worry. But once they start to separate or individuate, um, they realize that life is risky for them. And it's important, starting at that point, that they feel connected, that they're not feeling alone. If they feel alone, they have to overcome that anxiety and fear through other means, which are less healthy for their enjoyment of life. So this is one of those crossroads in development when the child is starting to be aware of who they are. How do they see the world? Is it full of people who they can love and share and be loved by and work together with, or is it a world full of threats? And usually it's the parents who help them adapt as well as the parents can convey. So this is part of the development process. Um, and as children get older and become, let's say, teenagers, they can find connection through empathy with nature and with other people, or submitting to a group that may be negative, such as a gang, or conforming, let's say drug use, drugs and alcohol, dangerous paths, because if they don't have the security based on connection with family and good friends, they may find other ways to be part of a group and to feel safe. And when they do those other connections, the safety is only superficial. They still don't feel safe. It gives them something to hold on to, but it's not going to make them feel peace and well-being inside, because it's a fake connection. The way to feel that fulfillment is real connections with the world and with people. So does anyone else have a thought, like, or have seen this happen, where someone tries to cover over the anxiety, and what does that lead to? Can you come up with an example or two, or something you've seen in your own life? Okay, I didn't give you any. Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah, I think it leads to anger
Hmm.
in some people, and a lot of resentment
Yes, I agree.
towards things.
Do you have any idea why? I agree with you, but why would people get angry if they have this fake connection to the world?
Because I think we don't look into solving problems when they're small. We don't want to see little problems to solve them, and we push them aside, and then gradually creates more anxiety and then more anger. It's my thought. I'm not
Yeah, I
100%
agree. I
sure.
agree with it.
Is that
Sure.
right?
Sophia, you want to say something too? Sophia and Linda also.
Well, I think that I really appreciate your bringing this up. It's a really complicated issue. And I think it also leads to depression. I think it also leads to not knowing how to express oneself. And so things are not expressed, that there's a potentially a healthier way to show expression.
Right. Yes, I think that's another angle on this issue. And Linda, you want to add something? I think you have your hand up for this.
Right. I would like to go a little bit back to what you were saying and add a piece to it, that it's important you teach children from as young an age as they can absorb this, that if they don't have a best friend or a group that they belong to and so on and so forth, and we all know that everyone's happier having a social group to connect with. But it's very important to explain to them that if they are with themselves, not alone, but with themselves, that they themselves offer a lot to themselves. They can be happy with themselves. And in fact, the first thing they need to do is be happy with themselves, work on that. And then it's going to be much easier to create
Yes.
a nice social group around them.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, all three of these things are pointing to more complex or subtle conversation. But about the anger, I think the reason, and I agree with your explanation. I may put it slightly different, that there's a natural urge to grow. The human being wants to grow, especially children and teenagers are trying to grow to be adults and be happy in society. And if that gets blocked and they can't express themselves and be connected, it's painful. And then the result is
Mhm.
often anger. It can also be depression, so then the anger is not being expressed, but it leads to unhealthy emotions and to behaviors that are not optimal either. Because
Correct.
the natural urge, just like a flower wants to grow up, or a tree wants to grow and expand, and if it can't, it starts to get bent in the wrong direction, and other things happen. Fortunately, people can be repaired easier than trees, or at least they can be repaired. So, all right, I think
Couldn't
yes, Lita.
couldn't psychological problems, which are uh, physical in nature, affect some of this kind of thinking?
But psychological problems that are physical in nature affected,
Yes,
like a biological, physiological problem.
yes,
Yes, there are, and Erich Fromm mentions that there are a lot more other kinds of examples, but they're not of widespread societal impact because they're individuals, and those are important, but they're not part of the sociological analysis. In other words, like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, those have a physiological basis. I think that's what you're talking about, right?
yes,
Yes, and these definitely affect individuals. They're not as frequent enough to be a big impact on society. And this is more about the overall societal impact of psychology. Okay, does that answer your question?
yeah, sort of.
Well, maybe in another time we'll talk about individual,
Okay,
psychological situations, but that's a whole other topic, right? It's a big
yeah.
topic. All right, let's continue. It's a good question. I mean, it's an accurate point. There are a lot of other conditions we're not talking about. Um, this is mostly about the things that affect society as a whole. So now, it's interesting. Marshall Rosenberg is the founder of Nonviolent Communication, and Erich Fromm wrote Escape from Freedom and some other books on the topic. And they both talk about the difference between illusory freedom or illusory, fake freedom and fake power versus real freedom or real power. Um, in Escape from Freedom, Fromm calls it freedom from and freedom to, T-O. Freedom from means there's no one telling you where you can go. There's no one telling you what you have to eat. There's no one telling you who you can talk to. This country has a lot of freedom from, but we don't have a lot of freedom to, which is inner freedom, like to be happy wherever we are, whether you're working a demanding job or, um, you know, dealing with a difficult teenager in your life or other situations. Are you free internally and able to handle it and resilient, or are you easily stressed due to not having that freedom internally? And similarly, power over people versus power with people. Power over is like dictatorship, while power with is inspirational leadership, where people love you as a leader, they want to be around you, they like the way you think and work, and they're together with you, and your power, that's power with. So here are these two kinds of freedom, as it says there. By the way, Erich Fromm's book starts back in the Middle Ages. So uh, traces the emergence of the individual. There's some noise coming. I'm not sure who it's from. Can everyone mute if they would? Okay, the freedom from feudal ownership, religious extremism in the Middle Ages, and then other social orders, even the guild system of the early Renaissance. Yeah, let me just make sure everyone's muted. I'm not sure how to do that actually. Oh, here it is. Mute. I don't know how to mute everyone. All right. There's some noise coming from one of the participants. So if everyone can mute, that would be helpful. All right. So the freedom of from the Middle Ages, when people were told what their place is in the world, or he's the smith of the village, she's the cook for the village. They had a role, it was lifelong, and they didn't have to think about their place in society. As the Renaissance unfolded, and then the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, it started to bring out the idea of the individual making their own way and being free to find their own path. And along with that started anxiety. With freedom comes anxiety because you're not sure what to choose. So it's a long societal evolution, which is similar to what the individual goes through from childhood into adulthood. So in terms of communication, when we can show appreciation that appreciates the whole person, it helps liberate them and ourselves. I tried to find a picture that captures a little bit of that in everyday life. I just felt like the four coworkers are very kind, like they're loving, and the woman who's giving this little cupcake is kind of bowing down in appreciation, and those things help people be happier. When we hear the other person's feelings and needs, we recognize our common humanity. So how do we support true freedom, internal freedom in ourselves and others? Anyone have a thought about that? Maybe even something obvious.
Maybe just making sure that other people are spotlighted, giving them the chance more so than normal to shine and to talk and be heard as best you can, if you can.
Mm-hmm. Right, to give people center of attention and encourage them if they want to say something or recognizing something that they've done or who they are. I've heard you do that, Chris, from time to time. And I do think it's one of the things we should be doing in life. You know, it's going out of your way. Um, I'll give you an example that I do once in a while. For all you drivers here, if somebody wants to cut in front of me, like I'm on an exit and there's a lineup, I let them ahead of me. Big deal. And sometimes people wave or stick out a hand and go like that, you know, like that, and show appreciation. It's a nice exchange.
It is, and thank you for saying, because I have to remember to do that in particular more often.
Sometimes it's little things, you know. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to encourage the value of the individual. I think humanism, and Erich Fromm was a big humanist, and I am too. I think it's the right approach. It really emphasizes the freedom of and well-being of the individual, and a healthy society comes out of having a lot of people who are healthy and able to express and explore together. Um, so I just picked out a few of the things that we could distinguish. Uh, Love that is codependent requires something of the other person to match your expectations. I'm not saying everything's okay in a relationship. It's not that. It's more like you can only appreciate someone if they follow your rules, that kind of feeling. And really loving people has to, aspirationally, if we can, we appreciate everyone where they are, where they're at. If they're in a grumpy mood, you tune in and you try to be helpful and maybe understand what's going on. Maybe something bad happened or something bad happened in their childhood and they have a grumpy approach to life. But if we can appreciate people, that's really more love without the conditioning. And similarly, or related to this, healthy individual is someone healthy because they get a job, earn a living, have a family, let's say, and fulfill those expectations that society gives. They might be miserable doing all that, but they're doing what they're supposed to do. Or are they healthy if they're finding the contentment within, finding a way to express themselves in life and make a positive difference? Is that, you know, they may not be conforming to some of the other ideas, but maybe that's a healthy person. Which one is healthier? Or you can do both. If you can do both, that's great. But I think if you reflect, there is some of that. Yeah, he or she has a good job. They're successful, successful. They might, you know, I run into these cases. Friends of friends, family of family members, you know, other people you hear very successful. Meanwhile, they're drug addicted or depressed, all kinds of things going on. But they have a good job. They have children. Everything's great. Yeah, Marcia, unmute. Yeah, I can't hear. You're muted.
Mother Teresa is a good example of someone who you might say falls into the second category. Because
Yeah.
I mean, did she really have a job? I mean, she was doing what she felt was a calling.
Yes, and I'm not an expert on Mother Teresa, but from the little I know, she gave her life to helping people who needed help. So, and she
Yeah.
must have done it out of, you know, she wasn't required to do it. She must have done it out of some inner calling. And I would have to think, you know, she was healthy. She chose something that most of us might not be able to do, but
Right. Well, her mother was had a similar bent towards what to do with life. It wasn't totally self-motivated. She just went a step further than what others did, but it wasn't what, you know, find a job, things like that.
right.
That's all.
Get a good job, be an accountant or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Or a doctor, right? Don't leave that out. But I can't say exactly what was going on. I have no idea. I haven't studied her life. And I'll also say that there are people who have ordinary jobs. They're doing that, but the way they behave in that environment is generous, and they're still making a difference.
Right.
Even wealthy people need some help too. There's a lot of unhappiness in our country. So it's not just, I mean, she chose one population, that's great. We shouldn't ignore the fact that there's a lot of opportunity to make a difference in this country too. Even even with people who seem to have a lot of material goods, there's a need for um, expansion of their happiness. A lot of the times it's a purely material happiness and there's something missing. Yeah. Oh, Lita, did you want to say something? Because I see you're unmuted. No, Lita? No? Okay. Um, I I picked an endless spiral staircase of people trying to escape and not really escaping. This is the escape from freedom. Uh, One way to escape is to go with authoritarianism, and you may not immediately connect this, sadism and masochism. The authoritarian is the sadist and the followers are masochists. Now, that might sound like an insult, but this is more of an analytical understanding. Masochism is submitting oneself because it allows you to feel that you're connected. And the sadist is also connecting to those who are submitting. And the sadist needs those people who submit to them, otherwise they feel unhappy too. So it's a mutual dependency, and it's linked with authoritarianism, whether it's on an individual relationship basis or a political basis. It's giving up one's wholeness in order to be part of something else. A cult is like that as well. If you're a member of a cult, you give up your freedom to be part of a group ego. Another part of that is destructiveness. If you see the world as being full of threats, you'll try to destroy those threats. And the most common adaptation for this anxiety of freedom is conformity. Do what everyone else says you're supposed to do. That might be taking a job. I've known a few lawyers who, nothing against lawyers, but they took on law because the parents said this is what you should be doing, and they did it, and they're really not happy. So they're conforming with either parents or society, but they're not feeling the joy of the joie de vivre because they haven't found how to make it part of their own wishes. Does that make sense to everyone? So, if you look at whatever we do, I'll take a step aside from the slides. Whatever we do, we should have ownership of it, and not just in a superficial way, like I, it's never I should be doing this or I have to do this. It's I want to do this because I want my family to have money to pay bills, or I'm doing this because, let's say a job. It's not my favorite job, but I want us to be able to eat and have a roof over our heads. And that feels great. That's really important. So I'm doing this. So it's important to trace back to the reason you're doing things and not feel you're being pushed into it from outside forces. Sometimes that means changing what you're doing if it's too remote from what you really would love to do. Other times it means finding why you're doing it and finding the inspiration in whatever it is you're already doing. I was working with somebody who is successful in life, quite successful financially, but he was really upset because he's using marijuana at least once a day, and it made him feel lousy, but he kept doing it. And he kind of summed up his approach to solving problems as being in control of himself and keeping things level. That's at the bottom here. I want to keep things level and be in control of myself. And my answer is, why would you want to do that? because that exact leveling oneself out and being in control and buttoned down is what causes substance abuse, depression, and other problems. We're supposed to be spontaneous, all kinds of feelings and reactions and connections to people around us, not level and under control. Real control is the lack of compulsions. When you're free of compulsions, then you're under control. Then you can choose what's productive. That's real control. Did anyone ever have a boss use a bullhorn on them? No, probably not. But, oh, how many here? Raise hands. Are you speaking, Marcia? I can't hear you. All right. So let me start on this. Raise hands. Anyone here who's heard of the Milgram experiment where with shocking electric shock was delivered? And who's heard of the Stanford prison experiment? Okay, no. All right. These are two experiments with similar results. The Milgram experiment was started around the time Adolf Eichmann was going on trial for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials. And this researcher wanted to figure out, I'll get back to you, Marcia, in a few minutes. The researcher wanted to figure out whether whether there's justification if someone says, I was just following orders. And how common is that kind of response, and would ordinary people be the same? So the experiment was, I won't give all the details, but he hired actors who acted as the subjects of the experiment, who were strapped down into an electrified chair. And then the teacher was the person who would deliver shock to try to get the person, see how well he'd remember, how well the victim would remember things when they've been electric shocked. And experts before the experiment predicted even 0.1% would go all the way up to the full 450 volts. And then the top estimate was a little over 3% would go to 300 volts, which, is a lot of electricity, right? It turned out that 100% of the volunteers who were giving the shocks, 100% of them delivered 300 volts, even when the person being shocked said, I have a heart condition.
Oh, no.
And 65% went to the, dangerous level, and it was marked as dangerous on the instrument they were using. So now, why did they do that? Well, because the person running the experiment had a lab coat on, a white lab coat, and they were the authority, and said, this is what you have to do. And there were some prompts encouraging them to do higher voltages, but you would think people would stop when someone's screaming or passed out and is unresponsive. So it really didn't happen. People just kept going. They had, some of them expressed concern, and the person in the white lab coat said, you have to continue. The experiment is not done yet. So the results were quite shocking compared to what people expected. Basically, people followed authority without using their own judgment. The Stanford prison experiment had a similar result. It later was considered unethical because they had one group of college students abusing another group of college students. These were not actors. They were actually locked up. They were paid equivalent of about $100 a day, and they were prison roll, and the guards would get more and more abusive. After 5 days, someone visited from outside and said, this is terrible, you can't do this. There were people having nervous breakdowns, and they were deprived of food and sleep, etc. So finally, the experiment was ended early, after 6 days, because the outsiders said this is unacceptable. but the prison guards were becoming more and more sadistic. And these were ordinary college students who were screened for having non-violent, healthy personalities. So under the wrong leadership, people will really surprise you and do things you wouldn't think. That's, you can see that in these two experiments. I mean, you can look these up later if you wish. There's a lot written about them. They're very well known. Milgram and Stanford Prison Experiment. Milgram is the name of the researcher at Yale. Yeah, Marcia, yes.
You said something about compulsion indicating freedom, I think. Could you explain, or maybe I got it backwards. Could you explain what you said differently? So I don't think I followed that.
Your instincts are correct. Compulsion is not a sign of freedom.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's right.
so freedom from compulsions, freedom from obsessions is part of internal freedom.
Yeah. Okay. I thought it sounded backwards.
Yes.
Thanks.
Agreed. So I thought this is a nice picture. I have a resource for photographs. It was interesting though. I did a search for leader. The word I put in was leader, just that. And there were hundreds of pictures. As I scrolled through all of them, almost all of them had some guy or woman standing in front of a group with his arms crossed, being like a tough person, or I can't show you, arms crossed, serious, I'm a leader. Like the leadership was some kind of tough authority figure. Even the women had their arms crossed and looked, cheerless, not very happy. And then there were people behind them following their leader. And this picture here, I think, is a better example of leadership. This is a business person with some of his staff, and I don't know who he's supposedly meeting, shaking hands with someone, but this is a human interaction going on here, not an image of leadership. So words are always ambiguous, always, but real leadership involves spontaneity, involves the whole person and bringing out the best in other people, the whole person, like their creativity, their originality. And leadership should be able to bring those things out. Words that are based on empathy and insight improve people's lives and improve situations. Sometimes the result is not seen right away. Sometimes we have to persist for minutes, hours, months, or years, maybe even lifetimes. But when we're acting in the right way, with empathy and understanding, we're making a difference. It's not always immediately visible, but it is important. And that's nonviolent communication, is really the study of how to do that, how to communicate without judging others and blaming them, and yet expressing what's important in the moment, what's alive in the moment, and making things more authentic, more connected, more enjoyable. So motivation, this may ring true for some of you, especially in the corporate world. Like if you give an employee extra cash for doing a good job, it's okay. But if you're still a mean boss and you're manipulating the employee to put in extra overtime, there's still something lacking. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with giving a reward for hard work or for any kind of effort, but the connection is most fundamental. So in this picture, father's giving affection to his son. Obviously, they're having a good time. And rewards such as trophies, cash, TV time, those are not so helpful. Think about it. You know, what people really want is to be seen and appreciated and to make a difference in their world. That's what people really want. That's the gold standard. And everything else is like, you know, frosting on the cake. Maybe a little bit of frosting's okay, not too much, right? One of the families I worked with a while back was with a 14-year-old, and the father and son were fighting a lot, arguing a lot. So the mother was upset by this. She was more like peaceful, but she didn't know what to do. So when I got involved, I tried to tell the father to bring him in, you know, discuss things with him, discuss why things are important to you. At first, the father was like grinning at me, like, and I could tell he was dismissive of what I was saying. And I said, "You're not believing what I'm saying, right? You think I'm wishy-washy." He said, "Yeah, I think so." But we talked about it, and he tried it out. And within a few weeks, they were having a great time together. They were doing projects together, and the whole nature of their communication changed. And that I worked with them for a few more months because there were other things, but it changed the whole direction that the relationship was going. So this is power with versus power over. And by the way, behavior problems, maybe they're pointing to something that's needed, not rather than it being a problem, what is it trying to tell you? If a teenager is doing certain things, what's missing? What are they trying to tell you? Same with an adult. Any thoughts? Anyone? By the way, okay, Marcia, hold on, because I want someone who hasn't spoken at all yet. Anyone want to jump in, take a chance? We're friendly here. No? Okay. Marcia, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a general idea of empathy. Empathy, I think, means sort of getting into somebody else's skin and feeling what they're feeling. And I guess I know that there's a difference. Sympathy is when you look at another person and you feel, let's say you feel bad for something, and empathy is more of when you relate as if you are the same person as they are. Could you express it differently, some for like a lower level, maybe with examples or something like that?
All right, a good question. As you were asking the question, I was thinking about how I would, my own definition, because I read plenty of definitions, but I think empathy comes when you're open to yourself, when a person is open to themselves and present, they can naturally feel the other person's situation. It doesn't require an effort, so to speak, except maybe if you call staying open an effort. But if you allow yourself to be there, present, you will automatically be empathetic. It's our nature, human nature. You know, this is one of those big debates, but I think fundamentally we are good. Fundamentally, we're meant to be empathic, empathetic, generous. That's kind of, you know, we are social beings, that's for sure. Human beings are social and want connection. When that gets distorted or turned upside down, people can become vicious and bad things can happen. But our fundamental nature is we want to understand other people and be understood ourselves and be connected. So empathy is a natural expression of who we are. Sympathy is a bit less direct. It, as you
May
said,
I interject
distance. Yeah, Chris.
and ask a question with regards to that?
Yeah.
So I feel that I have good understanding for myself of empathy, but when you say being present makes you almost necessarily by default have empathy. Can you describe define what is being present?
Yeah, again, words are always, can be made to be living words or dead words. In other words, what do they convey in terms of energy? But being present, I would put it this way: when our own obstacles internally are worked through living life and trying to grow as a person, gradually letting go of anger, resentment, all those kind of hang-ups, our true nature starts to appear, which is being present. Instead of being obsessed with money or worries about money or resentment of the boss or whoever, when our mind is clear, we're automatically present and a soft and awake, soft and wide awake. It sounds like an opposites, but actually, when we're fully awake, our mind is flexible and fluid and adaptable, and that's when we're present. Does that make sense?
It does. Would that include perhaps, I think you said it, maybe I'm just repeating a little bit, but emptying your mind, and therefore you're not thinking the future, think of the future and the past and what's to come, what you need to do. That's being present, and therefore your mind is open because you're not burdening it with other ancillary thoughts. I don't know.
Yes. I want to clarify, like, there's nothing wrong with thinking about, what's my next paycheck going to be? But obsessing, like being stuck on a thought pattern, is counterproductive. Our mind should be flexible. Let's say I'm thinking about, okay, what's the tax bill going to be this year? And suddenly someone calls me and starts talking about what's going on in their lives. I should be able to drop what I was thinking about and really hear what they're experiencing. So we need our intellectual mind. We need thinking. That's part of being human. But when we're not stuck on different things, we're naturally resilient and responsive to the environment. All right? Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's even in Tai Chi, which I work with Tai Chi, when you let go of your tension, your brain automatically knows what to do, how to move, how to catch something that's falling. So it's not because you get smarter and faster at thinking it out. It's because your brain already knows the answers and your brain already knows how to connect to other people. But when we get in our own way, that no longer happens so easily. I do have some things to discuss since we have some time. Yeah, I was working on these this morning. Hope they're good examples. I even have politics here. I hope I'm not making a mistake. But these are all actual examples that I have encountered in different ways. So you or someone you know might have sent an email or even a couple of emails and didn't get a response. So what happens? How do you respond internally? God damn it, what's wrong with them? What are they thinking about? They don't like me anymore. How am I going to get this contract if they don't answer? Okay, I mean, those are just some examples, but I'm talking here a business contact who you're emailing. Chris, you're smiling. Sounds like it. Is this touching a nerve of some kind?
No, it's not touching a nerve. It's just funny. I don't know, like stories go through my head of people doing this and how people react and how people get
Well, that's what I meant.
overwhelmed
I
and
didn't mean
just
that,
talk to themselves all the
yeah,
time. Yeah.
I didn't mean that you were stuck in this situation, but that it resonated with something you've seen going on or experienced.
Absolutely. Very much so. Many different circumstances as I'm reading a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen it too, and I've experienced it. I emailed somebody, and you could think, oh, they decided not to respond, but then it turns out that your email got blocked by their server or something, else, or oh, the email is in my outbox, it never got sent. Um, so you have to be careful about your responses, right? And usually, I find because maybe we all have a little component of feeling not heard, that our first response might be either feeling rejected or not a priority anyway. But you have to really assume like, oh, yeah, one time I don't get over worked up about these too much, but I'm talking about subtle internal responses. But then I remember one person had broken his leg, I think it was, and he was in the hospital, and I was wondering, why didn't he answer my email? So really, in a more subtle way, if a person didn't answer, are they distracted? Are they overwhelmed? This is pretty common now. Somebody just didn't even see it because they got so much going on, or they didn't get to it. So, it's important to be open to the real situation, the whole situation. But I'm talking a lot. I wanted other people to give their thoughts on this scenario. Any contributions, especially someone who has not spoken before? Okay. Marcia, I might get back to you, but I'm trying to encourage. Sophia, I think you spoke a little at the very beginning. If you want to add something here, you're welcome. Ken, you're on the ski slope. I don't want you to talk while you're skiing. That could be risky. Um, okay.
What comes to mind to me with this issue, that the example that you gave was the idea of assumptions, and that they say the saying is, an assumption makes an ass out of you and me. And so
Yeah.
if someone doesn't respond to your email, you have no idea what happened, and you can project into it and feel that they're deliberately ignoring you, or they're mistakenly ignoring you, or whatever, but that it's all an assumption, it's fantasy. And to just to kind of realize that in advance
Mhm.
is a way of avoiding self-criticism or self-doubt or so forth.
Yeah. Sometimes reminding yourself at the beginning of a day, like some people will respond, other people will not respond. Um, even Buddha said, if you stay silent, some people will criticize you. If you say anything, some people will criticize you. No one escapes being criticized in this world, but we can't pay too much attention to it, including when people do not respond or they ghost you. Some people I know who are in dating apps, they have an initial exchange with another person and then the person totally disappears. And apparently that's happening a lot in the dating world. And you have to have a strong, mindset to not take it personally. They don't even know you in that kind of situation. But there's a lot of cases where we need to come back to our own self-confidence or self-love and not worry, like, what does it mean about me if somebody else didn't answer? I think that's really important because people, not only do they not answer, sometimes they'll say something you don't like. And if it disturbs you too much, you're vulnerable to external stress, which is not a good place to be. Um, anyone else? All right, hold on, Marcia. I'm going to keep going a little bit more. So this is again with the client. One parent hit him quite a lot, pretty violently, and the other parent ignored him. So how do you handle that? And we may all have some lesser version of that. But how do you deal with that reality if you're now an adult?
Uh, Someone at the Ethical Humanist Society gave a lecture or a talk about forgiveness. And are we talking about the second one where the parent?
Yes. Yes.
And if you stop and think about what your own parents went through, and perhaps think about whether you can forgive them for things that happened in childhood because you feel that they just didn't know any better in terms of raising a child.
They sure didn't. Damn it.
And I think about a student I had who complained to me that her mother just gave her away. And this was very upsetting to her. She just said she just gave me away. And we stopped and talked about how young her mother was at the time when she had her, and how difficult it must have been for her to even think about raising a young child, a baby. And it seemed to help her a great deal by just talking through some
Well,
of
your being there was probably important, allowing her to share that with you. I do want to say, and this is see, these are intense, deeply felt experiences, especially things in childhood or traumatic events like being in warfare, very major things are persistent. So I remember Judy gave that talk at Ethical Society, Judy Rosemarin, about forgiveness, but you cannot forgive prematurely either. It could take a lifetime to forgive abuse that a parent provided you with. It could take a very long time. It could take decades, let's say. However, my experience of it would be you at least hold off. You don't take, you don't act out if you're angry at what happened in any part of your life, actually. If it's upsetting to you, you don't act on it because you know that you have to deal with that and understand that frustration that you feel. So at times you can't just say, I forgive, my parents had a hard time growing up. Sure, that's true, but I still, I still don't forgive it. Look what they did to me, right? That kind of feeling. It can be intense. So premature forgiveness is not going to work fully, but knowing that other people care and are there for you, perhaps later you provided some of the parent feeling that they didn't get from her mother. You were a temporarily like a mother figure, listening and caring about her. So that's helpful, right? But it might take many visits to the topic to recover from that or to move further. You know what? When someone says, just forgive them, they didn't know any better. Those are good words, but they don't deal with the deeper feeling. So sometimes it takes a lot more introspection and time to process that. And ultimately, forgiveness is important. But it doesn't always come right away. Anyone have a thought about that?
Nancy?
All right. Linda, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'd like to say something. You had mentioned the parents, one who's always screaming and yelling and so on and so forth, and one who is pretty much mute. The one who is always screaming and yelling from the point of view of the child, would be the person who is out of control, and the one who is mute would be the person who seems to be in control. And with regard to parents and how they raised you, and I think everyone on earth, well, maybe I shouldn't say everyone, but the majority of us feel like they wronged us or they didn't come through in one way or another. And how do you deal with this? In my own experience, I have found that first you consider your own feelings, how you were not met at certain points in your life for the needs you had. Then you look at the kind of life your parents had growing up and what tools they actually had in raising you, in giving you what your needs were. Every generation has different needs. And the previous generation has very, has certain capabilities. I don't think any generation can provide the new generation with all that they need. I think all of that is part of the healing. And then in therapy, you learn to parent yourself, to give yourself. And that, I think, is huge in the healing.
Yes, that's the real transformation, learning to parent yourself and give yourself what was needed. I am also, though, I am also adding this kind of advisory that prematurely saying, oh, I forgive them, they didn't know better. That's not coming from a deep place. Normally, it takes more than that. But I mean, this is a very in-depth topic, and people who work with trauma, which I'm not a specialist in that, but I do work with some degree of trauma. It requires a lot more work than saying they didn't know any better, right? I'm sure you know that. You agree. I'll tell you, I was in therapy when I was around 20, early 20s, and I said that my parent mistreated me, and I won't go into any details, but the therapist didn't say that's, they didn't know better. He said, yes! And that matched my energy, how it felt to me. It was a very embodied, direct response to that, the pain. And I've always remembered that as being, and that made a difference for me when he validated my feeling rather than telling me they didn't know any better. So forgiveness is a very big topic, right? Like, how does it become real? It could be a long process.
I just want to add one more thing because
Yes.
you mentioned something about your therapy. I mean, in my own therapy, I could tell you that I had a therapist that took this way further, and I think that was like an overkill in my experience because he handed me a plastic baseball bat, and then he said, beat the couch and just beat the parents who mistreated you. Just get it all out there. It was a little insane, but for some people, it really worked well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that's used in some approaches, hitting a couch with a baseball bat, screaming. It might be, under the right guidance, it might be effective. I'm not sure. I'm not trained in that approach, but definitely
Yeah,
energy is
I
needed.
agree with you.
There's a lot of energy. Yeah, thank you, Linda, for the thoughts. I'm looking at these text here in the chat. Peter, thanks for writing. I hope you can. Are you still here? Yeah. All right. I hope you can hear the meeting. And Andre wrote, what if acting spontaneously when you're connected with someone on the spur of the moment turns out to be violent when you look back at it retrospectively? Right. So, yeah, we're always trying to improve. So everything we do probably, yeah, Andre.
Hello. Oh, I think I can answer the question. We would revise our situation and we'll try to improve the next iteration of a likely event. I mean that if we have a chance to revise retrospectively, we can improve our future behavior in similar situations. Thank you.
Yes, so, okay, you're answering the question, right? I think, okay, thank you. Asked and answered, as they say on the law shows. But seriously, so what you're saying is that you can learn from the experience. You reflect on what happened and you say, oh, why did I do that? Now I realize that wasn't great. And maybe you ponder on that or reflect, and the next time you learn something and you automatically come up with a better response, right? Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes you have to make sometimes, not always, sometimes you have to make mistakes to learn, because, later on we process that. Perhaps when something comes very suddenly, we don't have the right answer, and later we think about it, and that's part of the learning. Yeah. Oh, Chris and Linda. Chris, you raised your hand there. Yes.
Hello, yes. Yeah, I find that I believe a lot of people get very stuck on the word forgive, and it makes it that much more challenging, because to forgive is almost to say it's okay. To many people, it is to say it's okay. And it's not okay, obviously. But getting past it, I think, is a lot easier for people to digest, is understanding. Putting yourself potentially in their shoes where they were, just to understand it.
Yeah, I want to jump in a minute. Yeah, go ahead, please.
And sorry, as part of that understanding, but you can jump in and I can always continue as well. Part of that understanding is understanding the whole being, right? So someone is made up of a whole lot of things. When you're trying to forgive somebody, you're so focused on this bad thing they did, then that can't be a good person, can't be a good thing. It's unforgivable to many people. I'm emphasizing that because that's what people are getting hung up on. But when you look at a whole picture of a person, you end up seeing lots of the good qualities as well. And the understanding might come a little bit easier, lending yourself to a future, like you said, it doesn't need to come soon. It shouldn't come soon, likely, of a true forgiveness, which can be more of a future goal, and not, I don't think something that's necessary, right, anytime soon. It's really understanding them, because an example of my parent, I have no problem with this. He had his challenges, right? But as an adult, because you say, how do you see them now? Well, he's passed now about 1.5 years ago. But before he passed, I was able to come to terms with him as a whole person and say, you know what, all those X, Y, and Z were certainly wrong, but what else was good? And so that's how you're able to deal with them as an adult, right? To see them as a whole flawed person who has their good qualities, and we can focus on those good qualities. And it's not about being the bad qualities are forgiven or are okay, because they certainly are not. But again, to summarize, it's the understanding.
I have to question the idea of good and bad qualities.
Sure. So, you want me? Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening.
No, because this is central to nonviolent communication. We don't think in terms of good and bad at all.
Except that most people do, but I understand what you're saying.
Well, the reason we don't want to do that is because it creates distance from our own awareness as well as with other people. Instead of good and bad qualities, we think we experience mourning, MOURNING, when somebody has done hurtful things, and we can understand the pain that made them do it, the inadequate feeling.
There you can substitute hurtful for bad, kind of, you know what I mean? You can for someone to understand it better, right? That hurtful, harmful.
I'm not sure if that's gonna,
That's what it sounded like you just said, like
well,
a hurtful thing. And that's
it's
what, when I think
hurtful,
of a
but that doesn't
bad
mean
thing, it's hurtful.
doesn't mean it's bad. It's a painful thing. Maybe saying the word painful is uncomfortable because that's vulnerable, right? It was painful what happened. It hurt. And the saying bad is turning it into a judgment. It's a little
Judgment.
it's less direct. I'm not trying to say it's bad what you're doing, but it's a less direct expression of what you experienced. It hurt. It was painful, and I wish he didn't do it. That kind of thing.
Agreed.
Okay, you get the distinction I'm trying to make?
Oh, certainly do. I
Okay.
certainly do.
All right, great. And that's part of the transformation, is to understand the pain and the joy. Sometimes when people do something out of joy, we don't tune into it, and we can't, oh, there he goes again, over the top, there she goes again. But actually, like, what's that person experiencing? It's this fulfillment. So we want to be able to have peak experiences, including sadness, like loss and, the lost opportunities. Marshall Rosenberg talks a lot about that, by the way, and I feel this too. When I look at political things in our country and a lot of other situations, I come back to sadness about the negatives that are causing pain. And if I'm angry about it, it's going to get in my own way. So I want to understand it as, how can we make life better for everyone, rather than they're bad, we're good. So, it's a little bit of the politics. Rather than good and bad, what are the opportunities we have to make life better, more enjoyable, more fulfilling? So we're near the end here. Okay, last one. I want to quickly do this one because this comes up a lot. When there's a couple where, a man and a woman, where they're having some problems, and I ask, it's usually the husband, if I ask him, can you say something you love about your wife? When they're in a very good relationship, she's kind, she's sweet and generous. But if it's not a very good relation, well, she's a good mother. So it's not a very personal statement. And it could happen the other way around too. He's a good father, or he's a good provider. That comes up. He takes care of the family. Anyone have any observations? Like, how do you say something more personal? What would the wife feel in that case, in the example? Or boyfriend or girlfriend? He's a good provider. I guess I'll just say, to me, that kind of a statement has some distance to it. It's safe to say, oh, she's a good mother. She's a good daughter. Okay, that's nice. You're not attacking the person, but perhaps it's more meaningful to say, I love the way he smiles. I love the way he holds my hand, or she holds my hand. I feel the warmth. All those kinds of things. More personal. And those come from the whole person. And what we're talking again with Erich Fromm and Escape from Freedom, the remedy for the escape from freedom, the remedy is to be a whole person, spontaneous, expressing your whole being, and be confident and comfortable doing that, and enthusiastically engaged in life, and sharing that with other people. And I think that's the point of his book and my ebook, which I sent in the email, a link. The ebook ends with that point as well. We have to make life more fulfilling for ourselves and for other people if we want to undo this division that goes on in many parts of life, including politics, but the workplace, friendships, relationships. How do we bring people back together to enjoy life more? That's the question, right? Any last comments? Few sentences, anyone want to say? Anyone at all?
On what you just said, it's it's common way to think about it is just don't be lazy in your response, right? You can do better than that in terms of she's a good mother. It's
Right.
really just expounding,
Yeah, like dig deeper.
don't do shorthand. Yeah.
Go a little deeper.
Go with that.
Take some time. You can, I'm
I
sure. You
like
can
the
do a little-
political comments that you have next though. So.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I try to stay fair and balanced, not like Fox News, however.
Right,
More
right.
like in the real sense.
That's very judgmental, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, right, sure.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, so you're a
Thank you for
conservative, a
saying that,
liberal.
Chris. I appreciate
Absolutely.
your
Absolutely.
viewpoint,
Good.
that I'm being
I
judgmental.
appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah. So
No, seriously, you can see these two things. The people are pointing at each other, you know? It doesn't get anywhere.
it doesn't get anywhere and run across this often enough. So you're a conservative, a liberal calls you ignorant. So what your best response, I think, is really share with me how, what I need to know to not be ignorant, and then you'll learn more, and that's good. And then maybe you'll impart upon them what clearly them calling you ignorant is very aggressive. They can then open up to maybe hear a little bit more too, and both of you benefit. That's my last comment.
I'm not sure any of it is aggressive, but it might be
Ignorant
unspoken.
is pretty aggressive, depending on the tone of voice you use, I guess. Depending on the tone of voice you use. If you want to go literal, ignorant is not an aggressive thing. It's
you can
just a
see
matter
it,
of fact.
you can see it as someone being passionate about what they care about.
Right.
So
Passion can be aggressive.
it can, yeah. Okay, last word, anyone? Okay, thank you all for coming here today. And I hope to do something else in March. I haven't decided what, but if you keep coming back, I hope we'll all get to know each other better. And I'm thinking about different things we could do, right? Thank you for being here, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.